Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reske.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
Welcome back to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and I am joined tonight with two good friends, Jim Reske and Randy Nickel. The three of us are very excited because we have a special guest that we're interviewing, Valerie O'Brien, and we have an important topic that we're going to talk about. It's a topic that's on a lot of people's minds in the world, and that is understanding Generation Z. And not only are we going to try to understand Generation Z, but we're going to talk about how can we effectively minister to this generation? Because I don't know about you, but I feel like there's been a huge cultural shift happening that I've never experienced in my life. So we're going to talk about how this all came about and some of the historical backgrounds to it. So Val, welcome to the show. Why don't you just take a minute or two and introduce yourself to our audience?
No, thank you guys so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to get to join you and talk about something that I really love to get to talk about. So thank you so much. But my name is Val O'Brien. I am born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. And I've been doing ministry primarily with students, primarily middle school and high school students, but that always trickles into college students also, for about the last 12 years. So I've been primarily in local church ministry, which I loved, and being a part of everything from, planning the events to writing discipleship curriculum, all that type of stuff. So really loved that. And just about 2 years ago now, stepped out of local church ministry to work for a parachurch organization that trains young leaders. So, especially in student ministry, it's kind of like dog years. You become like the old person when you've been in it for, only 10 years. So suddenly I was in the role of the teacher, which I wasn't expecting, but has really been delightful and I love it. So the organization I work for now is Josiah Venture. We work, like I said, with young leaders, helping them understand the mission and the strategy of Jesus and starting a movement among young people. So really love to do that. I'm passionate, like I said, about the local church. I'm passionate about young people, students, young leaders, and just love Jesus, love following him, and love just learning what it means to live the abundant life that he set before us. So that's a little bit about me. That's a little bit about my story.
Thank you so much, Val. That's awesome. Before we dive into the topic, I think it's important to kind of just set a framework. When we're talking about understanding culture, what are some of the concerns that we should have? Because sometimes we make these big statements and there's people that never fit the generalizations that we make. What would be some of those concerns? Because we are going to talk specifically about Gen Z, but just to kind of give some framework, what would you say?
No, I think that there's absolutely some concerns that I have whenever I speak about just cultural differences and those types of things. And I always feel like are good baselines to kind of start with this conversation. And the first one is always, and Greg, you kind of leaned into this already, is that you're always making generalizations. And I read recently in a book somebody that said that generalizations are always wrong and usually helpful. And I'm like, that is a very good way of describing it. They are always wrong, but they're usually a little bit helpful. And I don't know if anyone has done the StrengthsFinder, but my number one in StrengthsFinder is the individualizer. So I am like anti at my core making broad generalizations. It is just not something I love to do. I love seeing each person as an individual. But when we have these conversations, we have to talk in generalities. And that really does help us with the landscape of it. And I was even thinking, whenever we have these types of conversations, It's similar here in Cleveland. We have an amazing art museum and we have a beautiful Monet water lilies. And, if you step back and you look at the water lilies, you'll say, oh, it's in cool colors. It's, this is what it's depicting. But then you step up and you see all the individual brush strokes, and some of them are yellow and some of them are red, and they're all different. And so I think that that's kind of just the tension. One of the tensions that we have to keep in mind is we have to make generalizations when we have these conversations. That's stepping back and looking at the whole painting. But really, when we engage people, we're engaging individual brush strokes. We're always engaging individuals. And that's what we want to do. But the second thing that I'm always a little bit leery of too, and we need to be careful of, is that we don't become cultural relativists, and so that's somebody who is, criticizing another or talking about another culture, and kind of presenting all of them like they're just equal. Like no culture, or you have no real right to critique anything about a culture that you're not a part of. And we can kind of take on this mindset of everybody's equal, you do it different, I do it different, everybody's okay. But the reality is that we have a different culture as followers of Jesus. We come under the kingdom culture of Jesus. And we will always, it's natural human instinct to default to our own culture, and to think that it's superior to others. But we need to remember that we don't judge other cultures against our own, that we put all things under the authority of Jesus. And that's actually the beautiful thing about following Jesus, is that it transcends culture, it transcends generations. And so we're not cultural relativists, but we're Jesus culture. Like we are lining everything up to who Jesus is, to what his word says. And then the third thing is that we can so often just say, sometimes we just want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just say, like, don't people just need Jesus? And I love that. And my heart resonates with that too. I'm like, that's a great criticism. Like, aren't people always the same? And don't people just need Jesus? And I say, absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. People are people. But the message of the gospel has always been about our hearts. And when we talk about the message of Jesus, we want to engage somebody's heart. And these cultural barriers that can exist can quickly become walls that prevent us from really engaging with somebody's heart. Even in Bible translation, they always talk about translating the Bible into the heart language of the people. And so I kind of think about even talking about culture like that. We might be speaking the same language, but are we able to engage in the heart language of the people around us, so that their heart is soft and it's tender towards the gospel? And so I think that that's just an important thing to be considering also. Do people need Jesus? Absolutely. But we want to be able to speak in a way that connects with their hearts. And so those are the three things, at least for me, my fear and trembling in speaking about culture. Those things always come up to me. And so hopefully that kind of addresses maybe some of the concerns out there also.
Hey, Val, hey, it's Jim. First of all, I just want to say we're just so excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Yes, in particular, just for our audience that doesn't know, but I want to tell you how much I appreciate your work with my daughter. When she was in high school. So wonderful. You were such a strong spiritual influence on her life, and just eternally grateful for that. But I'm fascinated by what you were just saying. I think it's very interesting. I just had to explore that with you a little more. That notion you were talking about cultural relativism. How do you deal with that and communicate that? Because so many people in the world today, and I don't want to overgeneralize that Gen Z people think this way, but the general thought is all culture is relative. Nothing is better than anything else. So, and then because your thought on cultural relativism was one thing, and then you're talking about, well, we are part of the Jesus culture, and they would say, well, that's very nice, that's fine for you,
Mhm.
That's your culture, but I've got mine. And how dare you say your Jesus culture is superior to my culture?
Yeah.
Because they're all relative. So you're coming at a group of people that already say it is all relative.
Mhm.
Nothing's more superior. And how dare you push your Jesus culture on me? Right. And so how do, as you're interfacing with people in that culture, and at the same time trying to communicate a gospel, like you just said about just the love of Jesus, to say the gospel message is we're not superior to you. We're broken, lost sinners that,
Yeah.
we're beggars that have found bread, right? We found Jesus. I wonder if you have come across that, have experience with that, because it seems like the message can almost be at loggerheads. You're dealing with somebody who says, how dare you push your culture on me?
Right. Well, one of the things that I found, sometimes these conversations, um, rarely is somebody able to articulate that, especially a young person. Hardly ever do they get into that, like kind of a philosophical conversation about it. It more often comes up in like in more of just a moral relativity conversation, of like, how dare you say that that's wrong, those types of things. So I think that some of that is just kind of the general relativism, which we absolutely will talk about and is like a defining characteristic of the next generation. But I think one of the really cool things for me in talking to people who have a hard time, understanding that, is to just always come back to the person of Jesus. And so I climb at a rock gym, and I love getting to do that, and have just met some wonderful, wonderful people there and had some just amazing conversations. But like one of the simple things that I always say is, I'm like, you know what? And that's one of the reasons why I actually really love following Jesus, because he says this and he says this, and that just really resonates with my heart.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden it becomes this, and they're like, oh, yeah, no, that's very, very interesting. And then we keep going in the conversation. But I think, for me personally, that's been a way that I just in those interpersonal conversations have kind of combated that, like come up against that and just bring it back to the person of Jesus,
Yeah.
and the life that he calls us to live. And then again, the question of moral relativity is just is a hard one, is a really, really hard and tricky thing for this generation for sure.
Right.
Yeah, Randy, did you have something you
Yeah,
wanted?
hey Val. This is Randy, and Val, I had a chance to hear Val share some of this information recently, and you did a fantastic job, Val. I really enjoyed it. Felt like I learned a lot, and so excited to hear what you have to say again tonight. But I just wanted to say, it seems like we're in the midst of a massive cultural shift, and it's happening right now. And can you kind of share what's behind it?
Yeah. So this was just one of the big findings for me, and one of the things that I really just started researching, because I was feeling the tension of it in my own heart working with students, and just in the conversations I would have. I started doing youth ministry in full-time in 2009, right after I graduated from college. And the conversations I was having with students then, and the conversations that I was having with students 12 years later, were so vastly different. And I felt like interpersonally, I was having good conversations, but even as a group, I just was starting to feel that disconnect of like, I don't feel like I'm resonating with their hearts in the way that I used to. Like, I feel like I'm speaking a different language to them. And what does this mean? Is anyone else feeling this way? But, sometimes you just like, you keep plugging along. And in my head, I'm like, nah, this is just what it's like to get old. Like this is just the normal disconnect of it. And then when I came on staff, when I left church ministry and I came on staff with the organization that I'm with, they said, hey, would you mind stepping into this project with us about intergenerational disciple making, and where that breakdown appears in the church, in the local church today in America, and that type of thing. And I was like, absolutely, because that's what I'm struggling with. And the more that I started to kind of work on that and have those conversations, I realized that I wasn't alone in how I was feeling, and that so many people who love students, who are seasoned in ministry, who are passionate about what they do, have really been feeling this disconnect. And there's actually a lot that is that is written about it. And it was so interesting and just shed so much light on it and how I do ministry now. But I wish I could map all of this out on a big whiteboard for you all. But I'm going to try to describe it. This was kind of, I want to zoom out and then I want to zoom in for you. So if we zoom out and look at history, my sister is a history teacher, so we have lots of great conversations about this just around my house. But there's three primary eras that that in sociology they talk about. So the first one is the pre-modern era. The pre-modern era, which was pre-1600s. So in that era, it was characterized by the belief in the divine, in the supernatural. Think about the Roman idol worship, that God is out there, not knowable, that truth is found in the divine and it's out there. And then we enter from there into the modern era, 1600s into about the 20th century. The modern era, which we're much more familiar with, characterized by man being central instead of the divine, that we are looking to mankind for hope and for guidance and to science and human reasoning, and kind of this like truth is found in mankind. If we work together, we can figure it out. That's where we have, in the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, kind of like if we can rally together, truth is found in humanity. We can figure this out. And this is just fascinating to me. The major invention that tipped this era from one to another, from the pre-modern era to the modern era, was the invention of the printing press. And historians will point to this. And it makes perfect sense that all of a sudden they're able to easily pass down knowledge to each other. And all of a sudden humans have all of these resources. They're passing knowledge, they're passing it down to generations. And oh my goodness, if we rally together, we can figure this out. That's the modern era. Now then we start to tip into the postmodern era. Now, the postmodern era, we've been talking about this for a long time. We've been seeing the rumblings of this coming in art. We've been seeing it in universities. We've been seeing it in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. We've known that postmodernity is coming, and it is here. It has arrived, and this is the postmodern era. Their kind of mantra is that truth is found in myself. So we go from the pre-modern era where truth is out there to the modern era where truth is found among us, to the postmodern era where truth is found in myself, that I determine then what is true. And they're these self-determined truths, whatever feels good to us, the reliance on emotion and stories, decisions that are based on feelings and not facts. Those are some of kind of the characteristics of that line of thinking. Now, the amazing thing, again, and it's not hard to guess, is that like the invention that tipped the scales into really embracing the postmodern era was the invention of the internet. And all of a sudden now we're completely inundated with information. About a year ago, I read this just like the statistic has just blown my mind, but they said this was about a year ago, but they said that in the 2 years prior, that more content had been created in those 2 years than in all of human history up until that point.
Whoa.
Which just blows my mind. It's all those TikToks during lockdown, but all of those things. Yeah, Greg.
That blows my mind. But,
right.
It's really weird, Val, because, social media, I thought you were going to say the invention was social media. That
was Facebook.
push us over the edge.
Drill down. Yeah.
But it seems like this is the way I feel is like, when the internet came, we were in the information age. Mm-hmm. And if you wanted truth, you Googled it and you found the truth. Right. Now it feels like we're in the disinformation age. I don't know. Is that happening? Like now it's like you can't just Google something, because now the internet is filled with all kinds of false truth.
Right.
And it just feels like such a strange time. And
Right.
am I right in saying it does feel like we're living in this major shift?
Yes. Yes.
Like, it would be interesting if you lived during the time right when the printing press, came. If it actually, I really like what you're sharing, because it does feel like we're in that shift right now,
Yes.
and it is weird.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
Jim, do you want to
Yeah.
make a comment?
Just following up what you're saying, you're saying there's all kinds of falsehood out there and there's all kinds of disinformation out there. But if Val, in keeping with the three phases, the phase we're in now, who's to say what's right? Who's to say what's wrong?
Yeah.
Who's to say what's true, what's not true? Truth is found within, right? Yeah, exactly. So there's no sense of information or disinformation. It's all just what you find it within. What you feel like what is really true is true for you.
Right. Right. Kind of the live your truth mantra.
Follow your dreams, kids.
Follow your dreams.
That's
Follow your
right. We used to watch kids movies with their kids, and every movie would end with the same way. Follow your dreams, kids.
Right. Right.
Okay, so Val, let's continue on. And if you wanted to add anything to that, feel free to do that. But okay, so let's talk about Gen Z. Like, I mean, we have all these classifications, right? There's the baby boomers, and then the busters, and then millennials, and now we're in Gen Z. And I think this is where the opening comments of our podcast are important. Like, it's, not everybody fits necessarily in the has the characteristics of all those
Right.
but how does that fit into this?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. Just because, so we see that huge shift taking place in, I had an author who I really, really appreciated. Her name is Jolene Erlacher. She talks a lot about this change that's happening. And she says, it's like the giant tectonic plates of history are shifting. And right now we are in the middle of an earthquake. And I'm like, that is perfect. What a great way to describe how it feels to live right now. That the tectonic plates are shifting. And one of the things that we see, if we really zoom into the generations that you were just talking about, Greg, and listing, is that most of the times generations kind of follow these normal ebbs and flows of shared experiences and shared life events, historical events. And there are these kind of cohorts of people that have a similar way of thinking and a similar way of processing, but they overlap with the generation before them in significant ways. But they have just enough markers that they're a new generation. Well, now what we're seeing is that the waves that were coming pretty even with the generations, they went quiet, and then they hit tsunami, like they were a tsunami. And then another tsunami. And there is such a wide gap, specifically between Gen X and the millennials, and then Gen Z, that it looks less like a generational gap that we've experienced in the past in the United States. And it looks more like a true cultural gap. And that was so insightful to me as I started to really look and to study Gen Z, to say, wait a second, as opposed to saying, oh, these kids are basically like I was, but with an iPhone in their pocket. I have to start thinking, wait a second, these students are more like interacting with a student from a completely different culture than my own.
That's great. I love that. And so what are we learning about Gen Z?
Yeah, I mean, there is so much that has been studied and written on Gen Z. There's just a ton about their trends, about how they respond to education, how they respond in their family systems. There is just a ton. But some of the things that are the most compelling to me that I've seen in Gen Z. Well, first of all, I love students, and they are smart, and they're funny, and they're savvy. And that is just, you see that over and over again, that you just have these savvy little 14-year-olds. And it just blows my mind. They are they typically have been marketed to their entire life, and they can see right through it. They can sniff it right out, and that adds to their savviness. They are hungry for authenticity, for something that's real. We see this in just silly little ways, like studies will show that Gen Z, an individual who's a member of Gen Z, is more inclined to look at all of the reviews on Amazon written by real people than a celebrity endorsement when they go to buy something. They want something that's real, not just that's glitzy and the big commercial about it. They want to know the facts. They want something real. Another thing that I just love about them is they talk so openly about things like previous generations didn't. I was just cracking up laughing. I was with one of my friends who was talking about new employees. He's in his mid-30s. He was talking about these new college interns that were coming to intern at his engineering firm, and how around the lunch table, he's like, they brought up religion, politics, and their salaries right at the lunch table. And I was there going, do you guys know that we do not talk about these things? But Gen Z does. They do. They will just lay it all out on the line. And I think that goes in with the authenticity piece too. But man, it is a beautiful thing for us as followers of Jesus to know about Gen Z is this is not some sort of topic to tiptoe around. They love to talk about faith and religion. They love to talk about serious things. They want to engage about it. They're talking about it anyway. They love to talk about it with you. Just a really, really cool thing about them. And then another one is they seem to just really love a challenge. They want to solve problems. They love a challenge. And just kind of as a generational cohort, that's one of the things that really just ignites them is not just the pursuit of knowledge, but of applied knowledge. They're inundated with so much information, but they're ready to do something with it, and they're ready to solve something, and they love a challenge. And that's one of the things that I just love about this generation also.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.